Welcome to The Explainer. So today we're diving into one of the most famous, yet honestly most completely misunderstood texts in all of human history, the ancient Egyptian Book of the Dead. Now, if your mind instantly goes to dark, evil tomes from Hollywood mummy movies, you're definitely not alone. But it's time to completely flip that script. We're going to look at this text not as some cursed book of evil, but as what it truly was, a highly practical, fully customizable survival manual for eternity. All right, here's our roadmap for eternity. We've got 1. Coming forth by day. 2. Making a survival guide. 3. Magic, spells, and monsters. 4. The ultimate final judgment. And finally, 5. Unlocking the ancient secrets. Let's get right into it. Section 1. Coming forth by day. Rebranding the ultimate survival guide. Okay, so right off the bat, the very name Book of the Dead is actually a total modern invention. It was coined way back in 1842 by a German Egyptologist named Carl Richard Lepsius. He published this massive study on the text and just called it Totenboek, and, well, the name stuck. Over time, this huge, loose collection of funerary spells just got lumped together under this super menacing-sounding title, but here's the thing. It was never, ever meant to be a dark, foreboding book of death. What's actually incredible is how optimistic the original Egyptian name was. If you translate it directly from the hieroglyphs, it actually reads spells of coming forth by day. Think about that for a second. The ancient Egyptians weren't sitting around obsessing over the finality of death. Their whole focus, their entire goal, was about re-emerging into the light. This was a travel guide for continuing your journey. It was all about living on, not dwelling in the dark. Which brings us to Section 2, Making a Survival Guide, the democratization of the afterlife. Let's track how this actually evolved, because it's super interesting. Around 2400 BC, you had the pyramid texts. These were literally carved directly into the stone walls of royal burial chambers, and they were strictly VIP, for the pharaohs only. But then, jump to 2100 BC, and we start seeing the coffin texts. These were spells painted onto wooden coffins, suddenly making them available to wealthy private individuals. And then, the big one. By the New Kingdom, around 1550 BC, these spells make the jump onto papyrus scrolls. This is a massive, massive shift. Historians actually call this the democratization of the afterlife, because all of a sudden, if you could afford the papyrus, you could secure your own personal roadmap to eternity. But we do need to keep the word affordable in check here. A typical Book of the Dead scroll would run you about 1 deban of silver. To put that into perspective, for a skilled laborer back then, that was roughly half a year's wages. Papyrus itself was extremely expensive, and the scribes drawing these gorgeous hieroglyphs were highly trained professionals. So yes, it was technically accessible to the wider masses, but it was still very much a luxury item, mostly reserved for the social elite. So, you might be wondering, why was this incredibly expensive guide even necessary in the first place? Well, the Egyptians believed that when you died, your existence literally shattered into these different modes or fragments. You had your Sa, which was the physical body saved by mummification. Then there was your Ka, your essential life force that actually still needed food and water offerings to survive. You had your Ba, your roaming spirit, usually drawn as this little human-headed bird, and your Shut, which was your literal shadow. The spells in this survival guide were absolutely critical because they magically protected and reintegrated all these shattered, vulnerable pieces back together into the Ankh, a final blessed spirit that could go on to live among the gods. All right, Section 3. Magic, spells, and monsters. The Underworld Gauntlet. Now, the Egyptians were nothing if not incredibly practical about this super dangerous journey. If you needed the ultimate cheat code, you didn't even have to write it out yourself. Funerary workshops would prefabricate these beautiful, intricate papyrus scrolls, and they'd leave convenient little blank spaces in the text. You could literally go buy your afterlife survival guide off the rack. A scribe would just fill in your name later. And we know this for a fact because on some surviving scrolls, they actually misspelled the buyer's name or, oops, forgot to fill in the blanks entirely. Once you had your guide in hand, you were armed with serious magic. And I mean, the magic here scaled up dramatically compared to everyday life. For a living, breathing Egyptian, everyday magic might mean relying on, say, the healing power of saliva, or wearing small protective amulets woven into your clothes. But down in the underworld, it's a whole different ballgame. Your survival guide was there to protect you against monstrous gatekeepers, these horrifying chimeras armed with massive knives. But the guide gave you their secret mystical names. So, when a terrifying monster literally named He Who Dances in Blood blocked your path, your guide gave you the exact precise spell you needed to pacify him and sneak right on past safely. But here's the kicker. Surviving the monsters, that was only half the battle. Once you navigated those terrifying caverns and managed to pacify the gatekeepers, you reached the final boss of the underworld, and the biggest threat at this stage wasn't a monster at all. It was you. The ultimate question you had to face was, will your own heart betray you? Which brings us to Section 4, the ultimate final judgment, the weighing of the heart. This survival guide walks you step by step through this intense courtroom procedure of eternity. First, you're led before 42 terrifying judges, known as the Assessors of Ma'at. You have to prove you know their hidden mystical names. Step 2, you recite your plea, what's called the negative confession. Then comes Step 3, the absolute moment of truth. The jackal-headed god Anubis places your literal heart on a scale and weighs it against Ma'at's ostrich feather of truth. If it balances perfectly, Step 4 is eternal paradise in the field of reeds. But if your heart is heavy with sin, you don't go to some fiery hell. You just cease to exist. You are instantly eaten alive by Ammit the Devourer, this absolutely horrific beast that's part crocodile, part lion, and part hippo. Let's look a bit closer at Step 2. This negative confession is incredibly fascinating to modern historians, mainly because it gives us this super clear, direct window into the everyday morality of ancient Egyptian society. The deceased basically stands there and rattles off a list of 42 things they didn't do. Things like, I have not stolen, I have not killed, I have not caused anyone to weep. It really shows us that getting into paradise wasn't just about mumbling the right magic words, it was deeply, fundamentally tied to have lived a conventionally good ethical life.
But wait, what if you weren't perfectly pure? What if you did steal that one time and you're sweating because you're worried your heart is going to speak up on those scales and rat you out to the gods? Well, the Egyptians thought of that too. Enter spell 30B. This was a literal spell designed to magically gag your own heart so it couldn't snitch on you during the weighing ceremony. I mean, it's an incredibly pragmatic, almost humorous approach to morality, right? It's literally a magical loophole built right into the survival guide just in case you weren't an absolute saint.
Section 5, Unlocking the Ancient Secrets, Decoding the Guide Today. You know, when we talk about the Book of the Dead, it kind of sounds like it's one static published book, right? Like a novel you just pull off a shelf. But today, Egyptologists have actually identified 192 distinct spells that make up the entire known corpus. But here is the wild part. No single ancient scroll ever found contains all 192 of them. Because individuals handpicked which spells they thought they'd personally need the most, every single survival guide out there is completely unique to its owner. And the history of decoding this text is really this ongoing story of constant, thrilling discovery. Back in 1842, Lepsius created the standardized numbering system we actually still use today. Then, in 1867, Samuel Birch published the first big English translation. In 1888, the breathtakingly illustrated papyrus of Ani was discovered, and that became the absolute gold standard for how we even visualize the text. And guys, this isn't just dusty old history. As recently as 2023, a massive 16-meter-long scroll named the Waziri Papyrus was unearthed right near the Step Pyramid of Djoser. We are quite literally still pulling brand new copies of this incredible survival guide straight out of the sands today, constantly updating our understanding of what the Egyptians hoped for and what they feared. So, as we wrap up our journey through the underworld here, I want to leave you with this final thought. The Book of the Dead was never a dark curse. It was a deeply, incredibly human document. It shows us a people who were terrified of the dark, who were fiercely hoping for eternal light, trying their absolute best to live a good life, but, still pragmatic enough to buy a magical loophole just in case. It really makes you wonder, if you were standing in that courtroom right now, and your heart was weighed against the feather of truth today, would you pass the test of Ma'at? Thanks for joining me for this explainer. Until next time, keep learning and keep asking the big questions.